So, what I want to start doing by doing this afternoon is to talk about who we are. Most of you know my name is Shira Mach, and I am the acting head of the Center for Health Science Education, which is a unit that focuses on staff. Did you know? The faculty is so student facing. We all care about students and we all worry about how our students are doing and how much support, etc., they have. Uh, but there is also a unit, which is ours, which focuses on staff development, not so much on staff wellness, but much more on helping staff to do the things that they need to do or the things that they think they need to do. And one of the things that you need to do as a staff member who deals with students is to get feedback from the students about how you're doing, about things that you've done, about your normal things that you do, about a new, different thing that you've done. So, um, so feedback from students can help us in planning where we go with our own learning and with our ideas of how it is that we're going to teach. So with us this afternoon, we're privileged to have Shay Kelly, who has done a lot of work over the last year and a bit, particularly on looking at staff evaluations, the kinds of questions that we ask, and what it means when you have a staff evaluation. So to start off, what I want you to do is in the chat, please drop us a word or a couple of words. If you have had a staff evaluation, how did it make you feel? So think about one word. What did you feel when you opened that email and you saw what students had said about you or what your numbers were? Um, what did it feel like when you got that particular feedback? So we're a very small number, so I'm going to wait for every single one of you to put something in the chat. So the question, what did you feel like when you saw feedback from students on your teaching? And if you've never had feedback, then just say that. I've never had a staff evaluation done. Okay, Daniela, I'm happy to hear good. So quick behind the scenes comment. Do you know when you're in Teams, you can have your chat and your list of people open at the same time? So if you ask people for comments, you can see who hasn't commented. And you can invite comments then from people who haven't commented. So last chance at the question, which is, if you've had a staff evaluation done, then what did you feel like? How did you feel when you opened the evaluation and you saw the results of the students giving feedback on your teaching? And if you've never had an evaluation done, then just say that. Okay, Shay, I'm really sorry to say, but we have some silent lurkers here this afternoon. So people are here, But we really, really do want you to engage with the idea of what it is that we're talking about, because the whole idea of having an evaluation is part of a developmental loop, and that's why we're doing it in this series of developing yourself as a teacher. So if you haven't ever done an evaluation, you should consider having one done, and not even just the formal one. You could consider asking students for feedback, or you could consider something like what we call a minute paper. So at the end of your session, you can ask students just to tear off a small piece of paper and you give them a specific question. So what are you leaving this session not knowing still? What would you like to revise after this session? Or what was the thing in this session that you learned that you didn't know before? Or what was the aha moment in this session for you? Or what was the thing in this session that you really didn't get or irritated you or yeah. So I think Yandisa, it just depends which what size of class you have. And also, so you can say to them that it's anonymous. You won't know who put in the answers. And it just depends. You don't just ask them in general, so what did you think of my teaching? You need to ask something quite specific, because it's only when you start asking, for example, what didn't you get, that people start coming up with things that you would never have dreamed of. So it is useful if you ask for something specific. What was the main point of this learning event for you? And you'll see that people start saying that they got different things out of it. And that helps you to start thinking about different ways of doing things, and what works and what doesn't work, because something that you think worked brilliantly might not have worked from those students' point of view. So it's definitely worth doing. This afternoon, however, we're going to speak about what the faculty has in place for you in order to help you to have your teaching evaluated, not only for your own developmental purposes, but for those of you on probations who need documentation about their teaching, and also for when you all apply for promotion, you'll need a teaching portfolio, which is one of the reasons why we're talking about building up that portfolio. Part of it is providing evidence of what students think. And so, and so let's talk a little bit about what the faculty has on offer and how it works. And for that, I'm going to ask Shay if he'll start off for us. Shay, I don't know if Christine has given you the opportunity to share slides, because I know you have those. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So thanks, Shira, for the introduction. Um, my name is Shay. I'm a research assistant here at the CHSE. And today I will be walking you through our evaluation offering. Um, Essentially, what types of surveys we have, as well as the processes you can follow to request one from us. So I'd like to start with thinking about reasons why we should have teaching evaluated. There are a number of reasons, but um, I'd like us to really focus on the first point, which is collecting feedback for teaching improvement. I say that because, again, just to echo what Sheila has just mentioned, that for me, at least in my conception, I'd say the most important part of this process is that it's developmental and it provides us with an opportunity to improve our teaching and to also further engage with our teaching practices and your identity as an educator. It's also useful for developing a teaching portfolio. So, based on the results you get from your evaluations, you could add that as evidence to your teaching portfolio and use that as a starting point for discussions and reflections in your teaching portfolio about what those results mean for your teaching, as well as your development and your teaching moving forward. It's also useful as gathering information for human resources decisions such as reappointments or promotions. So we are offering four types of surveys, um, roughly based on what most of the teaching is like in the faculty. So we have a clinical tutorial survey, which is suitable for classroom-based teaching, whether it's an online classroom or in a face-to-face classroom. We also have a bedside teaching survey, so that's suitable for teaching the presence of patients. We have a research supervision and mentorship survey, which is suitable for supervision of MD and PhD candidates. And then we also have a teaching self-assessment. The teaching self-assessment you take at the same time as one of the other assessments. So the way it works is if you've selected a clinical tutorial survey, we'll send that out to the students, and then you need to conduct a teaching self-assessment. The statements in the teaching self-assessment are the same as the statements in the student's clinical tutorial survey. They're just phrased differently. So for instance, a statement could be for the students, I think that my lecturer is knowledgeable in the subject area. And in the teaching self-assessment, the statement would be, I feel that I am knowledgeable in the subject area. The reasoning is that in your report, when you get your results, it will be presented in a table and you'll be able to see how closely your opinions of your teaching matches with the student's opinion of your teaching along the same lines or as it relates to similar statements, which is a good point for discussion and further development in your teaching portfolio. Okay, so I'll take you through each survey and the various parts of those surveys, just so that you can get an idea of what sort of statements or constructs are being measured. So for the clinical tutorial survey, it mostly measures instructional or your didactic skills, and this collects opinions of your knowledge transfer skills. In terms of online teaching skills, it collects opinions of your e-learning skills, and course administration collects opinions of your course management and organization skills. For the bedside teaching survey, we have similar constructs, but also one that's a bit different. So here it would be measuring your clinical instruction skills. It would collect opinions of knowledge transfer of clinical skills. Teacher-student interactions. So this collects opinions of the learning climate created by the facilitators. So that speaks to through your interactions and your relationship with your students, with your class. To what degree have you fostered a safe, emotional, intellectual, or physical teaching environment where the students feel safe and secure and can engage appropriately. In terms of your course administration skills, that's again collects opinions of your course management and the organization of your course. Um, and developing critical thinking collects opinions of the extent to which critical thinking and engagement is encouraged by the facilitator. So the degree to which you, through your questioning, you help students engage more, bring them closer to the content or help them access the content through questioning, through asking for rationales or evidence for decisions they make, identifying gaps in their thinking, etc. The supervision and mentorship survey is again has three areas measured. So firstly, research skills. So these collect the opinions of your scientific investigation skills. In terms of your admin skills, it's about collecting opinions of your management of that supervision process, as well as how organized or planned the supervisee relationship is. In terms of student engagement and mentorship, this collects opinions of, again, the supervisor relationship, as well as career guidance skills, how much mentorship was offered, or, the encouragement of academic enrichment activities with your students, such as encouraging them to present at conferences or prepare manuscripts for publications. So now we are at the point where we'll discuss with you how to request an evaluation. It's a fairly simple process. You'd need to send an email to this address, including the hashtag. It's a part of the address. In your email, kindly please tell us what type of teaching activity you'd like to have evaluated, as well as attach an Excel spreadsheet of the students that you'd like us to contact, preferably registered with email addresses. So once we have that from you, I'll contact you regarding the progress, the outcome of your evaluation. Thank you for listening. That's the end of what I have to share today. I welcome questions and comments. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Shay. That's brilliant. You've given us a really good overview. Yandisa, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you. Can you please type out that email address on the chat?
Perfect. Yes, I will.
Because I've been meaning to set up my own things and you just never kind of get to it. So I like the fact that someone else can get to do that for me because I wanted to do the evaluation for a while. So this would be really nice.
Yeah. So it's useful to note that if you do your own evaluations, like say I was talking about a minute paper right at the beginning, those evaluations are not admissible on your actual documents. So for example, if you're going for promotion or probation or something like that, only university and faculty administered questionnaires are admissible when you submit those kinds of documents. Where your own evaluations are useful or where those informal evaluations are useful is in managing your own teaching, in wanting feedback from students and getting it directly. But you couldn't use that kind of evidence in your teaching portfolio formally. So that's just something to note. Anybody else with a question before we carry on? Okay, Shay, thanks for putting the address into the chat.
Okay. I hope I haven't spoken everyone to sleep.
No. All right. Nobody else got any question about evaluating your teaching? Okay, fine. So then we'll move on and talk a little bit about the university system for evaluating your teaching. If you look at the CLTD website, let me just get that up for you. You'll see that we have a whole series of offerings that CLTD can do for you too. So I do just have to say that at the moment they have a, I'm just going to move Shay off to the side here. They have an evaluations department that looks at evaluating teaching in different circumstances too. But the reason, and it's over here, if you have a look on the CLTD website, so they do give you an evaluation service and their contact details are here. So evaluations.cltd adverts. And so the first question I want you to ask me basically is, what would that be? I'm trying to find out if you guys are still alive at the other end of this session.
I have a question.
Daniela, go ahead. Yay.
But I hope you're going to cover it. But how much are these evaluations considered in your teaching portfolio? First, actually, no. What is the student response rate to the evaluations? And then how does it influence, how much weighting does the student evaluations have in the teaching portfolio when it comes to promotion? So say, students maybe not many reply, or there's a few negative comments from a few students that maybe, I don't know, get disgruntled that you maybe not giving them the marks that they want. And then also, like, I've never seen this one in particular. Is it more on a scoring system, or are comments requested from students? So, if you get a 1 for a particular component, are they asked to elaborate as to why not a 1 and not a 5, so that there's some context as to why the student is actually giving a low score?
So that's great. I'm glad you've been thinking about some questions. So I'm going to refer the one about student response rates to Shay, because he deals with that on a daily basis. So Shay, if you want to talk about that for a minute, and then we'll talk about the impact.
Sure, thanks for your question, Daniela. So in terms of student participation, generally I'd say, across the board, student participation in these types of surveys is low, in any instance. But there are some things that we can do to increase the student uptake, and that is one, first of all, carefully planning the time of your evaluation. So sometimes, you'd find that there would be 3 lecturers from the same department requesting evaluations from students at the same time, which can increase, survey fatigue amongst the students, so that would make them less likely to respond. So if you do plan to have evaluations, it's a good idea to maybe in some way plan with your colleagues about what time of the year is the most suitable for you to request the evaluation. Another note about timing is that the sooner the better. So as soon as you conclude your teaching, or even maybe a week before, it's a good idea to get in contact with us so that we could send the evaluations out while the experience of your teaching is still fresh in their minds. To survey students retroactively is essentially a waste of time. Once they've passed the course, they will really go back or would even want to provide any feedback. In terms of the type of questions in the surveys are a combination of open-ended questions. So there are 3 open-ended questions where they discuss your strengths, their overall impression of you, as well as what things they think could be improved. And then the questions are Likert questions, 5-scale Likert questions. Shira, over to you.
Thanks, Shay. Yeah, so Daniela, there's lots of food for thought there. I'm going to take the second part of your question. As soon as I've had a little discussion about the evaluations that CLTD do, and then I'll talk about how you would integrate that into your teaching portfolio and what that counts for once we've had that discussion. So nobody jumped out of their chair and waved their hands and said, if CLTD is the central university does teaching evaluations, why do we do it specifically in our faculty too? And you might want to be interested to know if other faculties do it as well. Anybody want to know that? I can't carry on until I get a response. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Yandisa. All right. So the reason that we as a faculty have our own system is because I could say we're special and different. I guess we are. The Central University system, they switched about 4 years ago now. In fact, in the heights of COVID, I suppose around about the end of 2019, early 2020, so it's not quite 4 years, to an online polling system, very much like what we do, but it's actually integrated into the university system. So if you say, I am teaching physiology to second years, and my course code is PHSL 2004, and I want an evaluation because I've taught them the last like 4 lectures or something, you can contact CLTD and say, I'm currently in the teaching block and I would like you to do an evaluation, please, of my teaching. And they go, okay, fine, what's your staff number? And that's all they need. Because the university system is integrated with SIMS, and they know every single student who's registered in that course code, and they are sent the questionnaire. And then when that comes back, you are sent the results of your survey. That works really well for big classes where there's one course code and not too many lecturers. Right. So contrast that with what happens in our faculty. So in our faculty, in the therapeutic sciences, certainly the classes aren't that big. So we're usually looking at under 200 students, which is not considered big. But in our, for example, MBBCH classes, we have nearly 400 students. Number one. Number two, it's an integrated course. And so there is only one course code for the entire year for our MBBCH students, not MBBCH, particularly the GEMP students. And not only that, they can have upward of 40 or 50 lecturers who come in and out during the year doing a little bit here and a little bit there. So you can see why the description of the teaching in our faculty doesn't really suit this large class, one lecturer, one course code lecturing that the Blue Exploring system is ideally set up to do. And so we had lots of people coming in and saying, I tried to get an evaluation with CLTD, but the first issue is the time issue. If you don't ask for an evaluation in the semester that you're teaching, you can't teach in one semester and then say, oh, I need an evaluation quickly. Can you do it for me? They'll only have your name on the project when you're currently teaching. So the timing is important, number one. And number two, if you don't do large class teaching with one course code, then the question is, what do you do? So that's why our faculty had to set up our own kind of system, obviously with the approval and collaboration of CLTD. So we have worked with them extensively over what our system could look like or should look like. And in our faculty, particularly that evidence, so the survey results that you get from CHSE, signed off by CHSE, carry the same weight as the kinds of evaluations that you would get through Blue Explorers through the Central University. Okay. So the question in the chat integrates well, and then Daniela, I am going to come back to yours. So you're saying how many evaluations are required for a teaching portfolio, and should an educator have, so you mean evaluations from different teaching lessons, one from a lecture, one from a bedside, one from a clinical skills? So those are all great questions. The thing is that in terms of numbers, the requirement is to have essentially 3 evaluations over 3 years, because the whole idea of developing a portfolio is to show change, to show development. And so the idea of having 3 evaluations is not about having within 1 week evaluating your physio teaching, evaluating your pharmacy teaching, and evaluating your nursing teaching. So that you can land up and say, but I've got 3 evaluations now, can I apply for promotion, or is my probation signed off, or whatever it is. So the idea of a teaching portfolio is that it's developmental over your entire career. So you would try different things and you would record different things and also different opportunities that you have to teach. And therefore, getting evaluations across the spread of what you've done is actually quite important. Because when you then want to produce evidence to put into an application or to a promotions document, etc., then you can choose what you want instead of only having a certain number. And I don't think it's bad to pick and choose, particularly when the evaluations show a story. So perhaps your first evaluation wasn't great, and the students said things like, we can't hear you when you talk, or your lecture was too complicated and we just didn't get where you were going with it, or your visual aids are not clear enough, or, you know, all the things that students complain about in general. So if you get an evaluation like that, and then you go away and you do a course with Lizelle on developing interactive teaching and learning opportunities, and using electronic devices or apps as part of your online teaching, say a Jamboard, etc. So all of those things improve not only students' enjoyment, but students' active capacity to learn, and they say that. So in your teaching portfolio, how would you report that? Well, here's my first evaluation. This is what the students said. And so I reflected and I planned and I did further development. And this was my second attempt. And this is how students responded to that. That is what they want to see in a teaching portfolio, when it comes to showing development in your teaching, which is really the bottom line of what that portfolio is supposed to show. So I'll get finally now down to Daniela's question, which is this one, the famous document. And let me see if I can just, there we are, take that. And can I make it a little bit bigger? Oh, yeah, okay, you can see that. So when we're evaluating a teaching portfolio, if you have a look, what you have to put in up front is the history and context of your teaching. So if you're doing a progression of developing evidence, then talking about the early classes that you taught and what evidence you got there of feedback from your teaching to students speaks about if you're teaching a large class or a small class, or exactly the bedside, the chair side, the clinical tutorial, etc. So you can show the range of learning events that you've exposed students to under the label of your teaching. And then if you come down here to part 4, the reflection on the impact and effectiveness of your teaching, let's call it, on student learning. And then point 5 is demonstration of professional growth. So we are really addressing in this concept of having to get evaluations, points 1, 4, and 5 of the rubric, because you do have to have a range of things available. I mean, teaching events that you have evaluated. But you also have to show how you've thought about those evaluations and how meaningful they were to you and what you did about it. And then hopefully, obviously, demonstrate professional growth. So we'll go on to some of these subcategories, but I think that the point I'm trying to make here is that having your teaching evaluated is a long-term event. In that you should do it, as I said, at least once a year. But sometimes if you're doing something unusual or different, you can do it more than that. I think you also have to bear Shay's point in mind that our students are very, very over-surveyed. There's a huge amount of survey fatigue. If they get sent a survey and they're really not enthusiastic, then they just don't respond. So it is worth deciding that you're not going to have every single lecture evaluated, because by the third time they get this is a request to evaluate the teaching of, and they go, oh my gosh, but I already did one. I did one last week and I'm doing one next week. So they don't respond very well if you over survey. And also you have to be careful about, for example, the GMP divides up its learning into blocks. And students rotate through different units and they change around about every 6 weeks. So it was unfortunate a couple of years ago, what we noticed was at the beginning of each block, so some consultants or registrars wanted to have their teaching evaluated and they put in a request, and the same group of students, as they hit each new block, had to fill in evaluations about the new teachers in that block. which landed up with them striking and saying they weren't going to do any more evaluations because they'd had to do it like 4 blocks in a row or something. So that's why Shay says it's important to find out who has already run evaluations and how many evaluations the students kind of have been exposed to in that time, because they're not happy about having to fill in a lot of evaluations a lot of the time. I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about points 4 and 5, the impact and effectiveness of student learning, well, on student learning, I'd say, and demonstration of professional growth. Because what are those things? So I don't want to make you seasick, but let's go through. What are those things that, here's the demonstration of professional growth. What are those things that will garner you an expert comment? So showing that you're keen on training, well, speaking to the converted, here all of you are listening to the training. Okay, and these count, obviously. So you can put this forward as your professional learning and your participation in it. Looking at the teaching and learning culture in your department. So actively participating in having a say in how students are examined or what students are exposed to, and where you can help with regard to making the learning experience positive for students. Talking to everybody else about your teaching, and that relates to peers, so your other co-facilitators or other people teaching different things. Then the more formal sense, which is, for example, attending a conference or producing a publication. And yes, I guess eventually scholarly publications. So in a registered academic medicine journal, and developing grants related to teaching. So those are things that we would view as excellent with regard to demonstration of professional growth. And a lot of that is sparked by reflection on your own teaching and on students' experiences of the learning that they're involved in. So I'm going to stop here, and I need to go back to my screen because I can't see if there's anybody who wants to ask a question. So let's go back to the chat. I hope I've answered the first one. Gillian, let's have a look at what you're answering. Yes. Yeah, very low. Yeah. Okay, so your question really relates to the low response rates. And the real truth of it is that online surveys do not garner very high response rates. And the university is currently looking at that as a phenomenon. And our department particularly does that too. We have slightly greater response rates than the Central University, I think because the groups that we're polling are smaller. And there is much more intimate teaching, as in face-to-face over, for example, a patient, or a quick tutorial in a side room next to a ward. So people are really directly in contact with the people that they're learning from, which is a very different experience from the lecturer standing down at the very bottom of a lecture theatre and there are 580 students in the classroom. And so our response rates are not quite as small as some in the Central University. Having said that, yes, response rates are small. And I raise here for you an even more philosophical question, which really relates to if doing an evaluation like this has any merit at all. And I really would welcome your thoughts about that. Shay, let's go with you first.
On the point of the low response rates, I fear I might have deterred some people to request evaluations, or the use of requesting evaluations if the responses are so low. which is certainly not my intention. But the point I wish to make here now is that we shouldn't let the potential of low responses or small sample size deter us from engaging in this exercise, because the point here, well, the focus is not really about generalizability of those results. To say, I've surveyed 100 students, they all think I'm great. Cut, paste, stick it in your teaching portfolio. Clear evidence I'm a great teacher. It's more about instead your interpretations of the results. So you could have developed really insightful interpretations from a sample of 20 students or 15 versus 100 students that's all just, sing praises and worship. So again, I just like to, remind everyone that the intention is interpretation and developing insights as it relates to the development of your teaching and your professional career as an educator.
Thanks. That's a very balanced view. I think he's trying to pull me back off the tangent that I was heading towards. Daniela, go ahead.
Thanks for that. So why I ask about how it's being done is because I'm just thinking about because for some of us, our teaching and our role modeling sometimes happen in small groups. And so when the system is about evaluating the whole class, there's some people who don't know you, that don't interact with you. And so I'm just thinking, is there not a better way of trying to propose to say, isn't it better to get an evaluation from, if you're a clinical educator, the students at your site? So if you're a site preceptor, so for example, I'm at Edenvale, it's better to get an evaluation from 10 students that are rotating at Edenvale as to what my teaching, how they see my teaching, and or rather, if we look at a particular group of students who you encountered from first year and then in their final year, if you're still having that interaction, because sometimes maybe you're not necessarily teaching a particular concept, but teaching and learning, as we understand in the clinical context, has to also do a lot with role modeling. And the type of student support that you then give in their career, in their clinical career. And I sometimes think to myself, and again, I'm just thinking again for myself, I'm critiquing the process to say, will I get a fair evaluation? Because the type of learning activities that I do, although they're very limited, that I do for the entire class, but I think I'm more effective in the small group settings because of the type of things that I engage with the students. And if those things get taken into consideration.
So Daniela, that's exactly the reason why, and Shay, I'll give you a chance to take a stab at that too. That's exactly the reason why we developed our own system in our own faculty, because the university system doesn't allow for you to choose certain students in a class. They are linked to the entire class. So if you go with their system, your survey would get sent to the entire class. I don't know if we made it clear, but in our system, that's not the case. In our system, only the students that you want the survey to go to are sent that survey. So your 8 students who rotate with you, or you could regularly track those students over 4 years if you want, as long as they know they are getting that survey. And we only send the survey to the students who you mandate. So if you have 6 students in a rotation, then those 6 students are sent the survey, which is why Shay was talking particularly about the generalizability of the survey. We're looking here for individual impact. We're not looking to say out of the entire class, 6 people responded and 5 of those think you're great and 1 said, I don't know who she is, but I'm still sending a tick. You know, so our system was developed exactly for this kind of clinical teaching, where you do have small groups. For example, some people have like 3 MEd students, and okay, so 3 is a bit small, but they, if they want feedback on their supervision, for example, for that research project, not necessarily on their mentoring of a registrar in the ward situation, although you could obviously have that too. they can specify exactly who they want to send it to and which survey in particular that they're wanting us to administer. Shay, I don't know if you want to pick up on that a little bit and reassure Daniela.
Well, yes,
Thank
I'd
you.
say that our surveys were intentionally designed for small group teaching. So, from my experience, I'd say the largest group I've surveyed was 60 students, and the smallest group were 4. And most of the groups are between 6 and 8 or 9 students. So it really is for a small group teaching. And so sometimes you'll even find instances where, especially where people have small groups, like 4 students or 3 students, over the year they plan to have 4 students assess their research or supervision, and then maybe again another 4 students that they might have teaching in the second semester or in third block and fourth block, another 6, and then by the end of the year they request a report of all of that combined. So it's certainly worth planning what you'd like to have assessed when and what areas you'd like to develop.
Sorry, I lost my mute there for a minute. Daniela, are you good with that question? Okay, maybe she
It's
also.
not. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're
Sorry.
okay. No problem.
Then again, apologies for my comment or my question. That kind of just shows how distracted I am. I'm so sorry.
No. So I think it's good. I think part of this is just being comfortable with the system and knowing what the system can offer you, and knowing why you have to do it, and knowing the benefits that you get from doing it. So all of those things are very personalized, and there really is a huge element of self-reflection involved. And I can tell you that sometimes it's hurtful when students say things that you don't necessarily agree with, and often you can just get irritated with students. You get the standard, I don't like her new hairstyle, or I had one classic. Oh, sorry, I've got a car outside on the road going mad. But the one said, he always wears the same jacket. And I was like, in what universe does that make any difference to his teaching? You know, so students can be petty. I do think, though, that if you make it obvious that it's a learning event that you're particularly interested in, then it's kind of useful to get feedback from them. The last thing about the differences between our teaching and teaching perhaps on the other campuses in the other faculties is that so we have often teaching done by registrars or people who drop in and do a little section and then move on. So it can be that they do one lecture a year and that's it. Or they design one learning event and it's a big bonanza and they don't do anything else. And so it's quite hard for the students to differentiate who's teaching them and who they want to talk about, because in the main university evaluations, what they do talk about is when you teach a block, so you've got, say, 20 hours with students, you should do an evaluation around about hour 13 or 14, because then students can respond to the kind of learning events that you have facilitated for them, and they can talk about your teaching and the learning opportunities you provide. And when you get that feedback, you can actually do something about it with that particular group without having to wait for the 20 hours next year. And you can tweak some of the things or change some of the things or deal with the things that they've given you in the feedback. And that's apparently really positive for students and student responses, because they see that something's happened as a result of them filling in the questionnaire. And so they're happier to do it next time, number one. And number two, it really is closing the loop, because not only has it given you feedback, but it's given you the opportunity to try something different while you're still working with that group of students. The majority of us, however, do not have that luxury. And when we see students one occasionally, then it becomes quite fragmented in their heads. Anastasia, do you want something on this point?
No, when you're done.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, afternoon. Sorry, I joined a bit late, but I resonate with Daniela's questions and her comments. We had done the CLTD evaluations last year and the year before, and I found that it was very general in terms of you couldn't really know what they were responding to. The questions were quite general, but it
Yes.
kind of like gave an idea to the whole course, the students' feedback for the whole course, because I noted that they will send it to a particular class. Like you said, like the SCMD students registered under a particular
Yes.
program.
Yes.
But what I wanted to ask, so before COVID, before the electronic evaluations, I had once done the paper-based one, the one, will pick up papers or documents from your office and then do a blind assessment after an evaluation and then send it back to your office, and then it gets, that was about 4 years ago or 3 years ago, well, pre-COVID. What I wanted to find out now, with things like Google Survey, so in the program, sometime last year, we had, after a particular rotation, I think the third rotation, for each of the disciplines within the program, sent out an evaluation to the students on Google Survey or Google Forms. But we made it anonymous, like not collecting email addresses so that the students don't feel like then we know who said what or done what. And will that also count as an evaluation if it's not done from CLTD or CHSE?
So, Anastasia, good question. And a lot of lecturers do that with regard to their courses and with regard to their own performance, looking for more immediate feedback. Although, truth be told, Shay didn't mention a turnaround time, but we are now producing surveys much faster than they ever used to come out. So there's not this huge long wait for your survey information. We give them students a little while to fill it in, and then we can produce a report almost straight away. So that's not really a reason, I think, for doing it yourself if you're worried about turnaround time. I think it's great for your team if you're going to sit around and have feedback and say, this is what the students said and these were their responses. And we're very keen to improve our offerings on the basis of this feedback. However, and I give you an absolute example, we have a clinician in one of the hospitals who was pretty angry with CHSE and said, I don't know why you can't do this. You keep saying students aren't keen, but I have every single student who comes through my ward and I tell them, I'm sending you a questionnaire, please answer it, and they do. And I get great evaluations, and then they move on. And my question is to her, who who evaluates the students? And she's like, no, it doesn't matter. Whichever one of us evaluates them, they're going through our units. And so you can see that the level of credibility of the kind of feedback that you get, I think, is heavily dependent on students knowing that an outside person is sending out that evaluation and actually will compile the report. Not that I think that they mistrust you or don't want to give you direct feedback, but the faculty won't accept self-administered Google Forms because there isn't really any oversight, although they're not in any way impugning or implying that they imagine that there is an irregularity. But running it through CHSE gives you the deniability, I'd say, to say that the process wasn't in your hands. And I think for evaluations, which can be quite emotional, I think that's an important fact to have. That an outside unit will do it for you, and also you can then be pretty specific about which students you want to speak to. So that's something I think that's a growing thing in our faculty, that we can be quite selective, and we can also get the responses back to you fast, which kind of negates the idea of you having to do a course evaluation with the Google form, unless you're doing it just for, wanting the feedback and immediately wanting to improve your offering, which some people also do. So that's also cool. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for the question. And Daniela, thank you for your participation. Great. Travel safely where you're going. So does anybody else have any questions while we're winding up the last couple of minutes? I don't know if you're not engaging just because you're scared of the process or you think that it's unattainable. And I do hope that within the course of the conversation, both Shay and I have shown you how very accessible this is to you, and also what the positive benefit of doing that evaluation is. Okay, Gillian, let's see the whole story. Yeah. Okay, so Gillian, I do have to say that with regard to Mervyn, I'll come to you now. Let me just finish the question with Gillian. With regard to the response rate and also with the comparisons. So we in CHSE particularly shy away from the quantitative aspect of these surveys. We don't like to say how many participants there really were. I mean, it's obvious from the data, but we're not going to say a percentage of the class answered. And we also don't compare you to university averages. So that has kind of fallen away, especially with the Blue Explorers. The idea that university averages have any meaning at all is just ridiculous. And even comparing averages of people in the faculty, because clinical teachers get very different ratings from non-clinical teachers or preclinical or basic science teachers, etc. So I don't think that there is value in worrying about the numbers. I think the entire idea of doing this kind of evaluation is for developmental purposes and then showing in your teaching portfolio how that development has been influenced by using the evidence of the evaluation. So yeah, Mervyn, do you want to finish with your question?
Thanks, if you don't mind. We've been talking about student evaluation. Is there any way of getting colleague evaluation that a colleague can attend our lectures or part of our course and say they can either anonymously or directly, and it I suppose depends on the ego of the individual, give us feedback as to this was okay, I think that wasn't, or your communication style or whatever. So it's not only from a student value point of view, but it's from a colleague point of view that says, hey, you're doing okay and you're a good member of the faculty, or maybe you should jack up here, or I don't like the way you deal with that situation. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Mervyn. I don't know, Shay, if you want to take it or you want me to deal with it.
I'm smiling as I heard that comment because yes,
I thought we got away with it.
yes, Marvin, certainly we are getting to a point where we will be able to offer a peer review service to the faculty.
What Shay means is, yeah, I'm still here.
So what we're planning to do is invite some educational experts in the faculty who've had some experience and some qualifications around health science education to join us rather we'd train them on the peer review process, and they would be your colleagues who would be called out to review your lessons and lectures, as well as develop reports and provide feedback to you, which you could use in your teaching portfolio as another form of evidence of your teaching.
Yeah, that's like a peer review, isn't it?
Yes, that's right, peer review.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll advertise as soon as it's available. You'll hear about it. Okay, Gillian, there used to be a formal document which we kind of feel is not adequate now for teaching in this day and age. And so the reason why it's taken us a while is because we've had to schedule training for people who we feel will be suitable for going out to peer review people. And they will have a specific mandate of what to look for. and then how to give feedback on the person that they've seen with the learning event. It doesn't have to be a lecture, can definitely be an activity. And then they would give feedback to the person, either both signing off on it, if you like, or specifically kind of face-to-face. So that's the situation. We don't at the moment have that system up and running. We're still in the training phase, but hopefully before the end of the year, you will be able to get a peer review, and we will advertise as soon as possible how you're able to do that. It's the same email address for the other questionnaires that we do, and that's where you would then have the opportunity to ask for a peer review. All right, everybody, I don't want to keep you really past 5. Which we've kind of run over into. So I want to wish everybody a good afternoon. And if you do have any queries or questions, you can send your query to the CHSE email account, which is the first one in the chat. The second one goes to CLTD. But send the one to the CHSE address, and all of your questions and queries will be answered. Thanks for coming along this afternoon.